Die Grenzwacht hielt im Osten dem Feinde lange stand. Heut kehrt ihr letzter Posten zurück ins Vaterland.
Typically in architecture, we talk about the built environment, and that will include the streets, the sidewalks, the buildings themselves, the landscape even. We do a lot of landscaping. We decide where the water might go in a certain area and what shape the hills might take. We can carve away at the land. We can move ground around from here to there. We can cut stones in different ways. We can do a whole lot of things, and all of this can be interpreted as built environment. Now, I'm going to focus here on buildings, actually, as that's something that's a little bit more clear. It doesn't seem as immediately natural as, say, a hill, even if so often when you're looking over hills, these have already been shaped and reshaped. Let's say for a suburb or a city, well, what you're really looking at there is conscious decisions. Not just the buildings, but the ground itself. Now, concentrating on buildings and this built environment, I want to go ahead and make a claim. The built environment is a living thing. It is part of our environment. It's something that we interact with. It's a representation of our actual habitat. Now, let's consider this in a little bit of detail. When you are a living thing, when you're a body, when you have all these cells and you have skin and organs and such, what will happen if you hurt yourself or if you age? Well, if you hurt yourself, you get a wound, these cells are going to come back in, they're going to replace. And if you age, well, those cells aren't replicating themselves as well, and that's what's generally happening. Different parts of your body might even age in different ways depending on what you put into your body. Put a lot of smoke into your body, I'm sure you know what will happen there. Put a lot of alcohol into your body, I'm sure you know what happens there. Sugar foods, all this kind of stuff. Now likewise, when we're looking at buildings, well, there's replacement going on, actually. And there's an interaction constantly with surrounding environment, with surrounding things that will happen to these buildings, that will affect them, that will affect how they age. And just like your body, different parts of your body are affected by different chemicals. They'll interact with different chemicals. Well, the same is true for buildings. It's the built environment. They will interact, different parts, different materials even, and have a different effect. But they'll still ultimately age and be affected by the surrounding. And there's a very important interaction I'm getting at here. When a building ages, you have different materials that will age differently depending on what they actually are and what they're exposed to. So stone and concrete, those tend to last quite a time. But depending on the type of stone you have, some of it might be more absorbent. Certainly, concrete has a certain way of absorbing, developing what we call a patina. So for these you have scratches and stains. Just like aging, these are a memory that the building will carry with it. It's a memory of this interaction that has occurred. It's a historical record within the buildings, the experience of these buildings, these pieces of the built environment. And this is even though here I'm starting with some of the longest lasting materials that you can get. These are the kind of materials that make European monuments so old in comparison to so many other buildings all around the world. These European monuments, these buildings were made out of stone and concrete before other areas of the world really developed these technologies, before they really worked with them. By comparison, we can look over at Asian countries. We can look at some really exceptional detailing, some fantastic buildings, but so often these older buildings will be made out of wood, and wood does not last as long. Structurally, you'll have problems. Now, this is actually perfect in a lot of ways, especially if we're looking at Japan. We're looking at a lot of structures that need to move because of earthquakes, so wood is much better for that. It's not going to crack. That's another thing. However, like I just said, it's going to age differently and it's going to age faster. Now, these days, if I'm putting exterior wood on a building, I'm going to quote a couple different ones, and the longest I'm really going to find for a lot of wood for its use on the exterior of a building might be something like 20 years, 20, 30 years for the very longest. And we're talking about treated woods, we're talking about hardwoods. Anyone who's really worked with woods knows that they don't really just go straight on the outside of your house instantly. You have to work with them. They have to be the correct kind of wood. It has to be treated. Maybe it has to be a tropical hardwood for it to really actually stay there for a long time. And that's exterior. At least you can cover your building with something else and keep the wood more interior and get more usage out of it, but it's still going to age. And especially if you put it in the exterior and you expose it to light, well, it's going to fade. And that's another thing. Even for these modern industrial products, these treated woods, just the most researched woods I can find, it's still going to be a problem that they're going to gray pretty quickly when exposed to light. So in the case of this wood or even concrete, stone, the reality is that these buildings last because people come back to buildings year after year, generation after generation, and they replace things that need to be replaced. There's a constant upkeep. Buildings fall into disrepair, they become ruins, they look like the ruins of Rome. If you go around, you look at the aqueducts, they'll fall apart. And even then, Rome was a very sturdy city. We're talking about wreckage that's still there because the materials were so strong, but still, these things don't look like buildings anymore. The reality is because for a great period of time, they did not receive upkeep anymore. The land was in disarray because the people were in disarray. Like a living cell, a building must be regenerated. It must receive materials and receive renovation, changes, upkeep, update, anything to keep it going if it's really precious to a people. For that matter, you could certainly consider all these restorations that maybe you've seen in museums of ancient architecture from Rome and such, which was actually painted. You can have these statues that were painted. And now, excitingly, scientists can go back and they can scan these sculptures and these pieces of architecture, and they can detect the traces of pigment that were there. And then all of a sudden we have these repainted statues because the scientists and the historians actually cared to show you how that actually looked. And then all of a sudden you have these sculptures which are restored in a way we haven't seen before, as well as they show aspects of these people, these ancient people of Greece and Rome, that we might not have necessarily expected, how these people represented themselves and probably more so how they looked. It's quite a big difference. It's an indication that these relics became indeed relics rather than living organisms interacting with a living people. The people who really cared about them, who would have worked to keep them in the condition that they were originally meant to be in. After all, when a people are no longer there caring about their things, when a people are significantly changed in some way, well, then these sculptures, these buildings, these monuments, they all become dead skin of a dead organism. So many ancient churches, after all, cease to function as churches. So many ruins, well, you're not going to live in them. You're not going to live in the Parthenon, and you're not going to live in Stonehenge. No one's going to be there. No one's going to be adhering to the ancient ceremonies. However, I am certainly an advocate of learning from these things. And I mean learning in a real way, because as I'm talking about, these things live. They reflect the people who create them. I'll offer up one more significant contrast here. Consider the Taj Mahal. Now, not everyone knows this, but the Taj Mahal, being so very white, well, it's also being stained because there's pollution in the air. It's being stained more yellow. First, they discovered that it was becoming more yellow, so they actually went and they imposed a lot of environmental restrictions to keep the air around there more clear, and that has helped. But mind you, this has also, in effect, become a political maneuver, because the Taj Mahal, it's taken as a symbol of India, and it's been protected through multiple wars. They set up scaffolding. It's one of the main sites that you would visit. But other people don't know this. There's a political party in India that want to tear it down. Yeah, pretty vocally. They would want to, renovate it, change it, tear it down. Just don't make it what it is anymore. Because if you're looking at the Taj Mahal, it might be kind of obvious. It doesn't really look like it was designed and built for the pride of Indian people. It looks definitively more Arabic. It looks maybe more Turkish. It's something in that architectural vernacular. It's something that has the domes and actually has minarets. It's not something of a Hindu religion. It's not something which has the same proportions and shapes that the Indian people use in their own architecture. And this is because, indeed, this was a completely different people who designed and built the Taj Mahal. The rulers who decided to have the Taj Mahal and designed it, they were definitely not Indian. They were, like I said, that's their architecture. They had come into that space and they were establishing their own empire, and it was representative of their own religion. They were not Hindu. So despite India now taking such pride in the Taj Mahal, the reality is that they just took that land through military occupation. It's not their design, it's not of their people, and it's not their religion. It's nothing to do with them. It's an empire that doesn't really exist anymore, and a people that don't really exist anymore. But for the political party that especially dislikes the Taj Mahal, well, it's a reminder that once this land really did belong to someone else, it had been taken, after all, by this other group who were coming in and had become the aristocracy of that area. Now, I'm sure you can relate. In an age of globalism, we look around and we constantly see these buildings that were very clearly designed by other groups. Architecture that just does not feel like home. Some monuments, some buildings that are clear expressions, in the architect's own words often enough, of a Jewish pride, or a black pride, or an Amerindian pride. They'll call it Native American. All of Europe experiences this too. The expression of biospirits collides within architecture. And quite simply, we just don't control the narrative. It could simply enough be said that instead, wherever we go, we inevitably recreate some Western culture. It just follows us around. We create Western civilization. And it's not like it just follows us around. It's in our nature. It's in our biological nature. And you can see that in the architecture itself that we produce and reproduce. I'm getting at this idea of the living organism again. The building as a living organism. Well, it's our home. It's our environment. It's what we create. Kind of like a nest, you could say also. But it's something that comes naturally to us. We seek a certain shape, certain form. We seek certain aspects of these houses, these buildings, and these community centers that we like, uniquely so. And so, yes, certainly a building does not have any sense of consciousness, even less of a life force than a living cell, but we react to it and we replicate it as if it were a cell to be replicated. You see, it's our interaction with the built environment. It's our desire for that interaction. But when seen this way, when there's one built environment, when it's a shared built environment of a people forming a community, we start to realize no man is an island. You're not an individual. And communities come together. Large communities come together to produce materials and to produce buildings, to produce the entire community centers, to produce our religious centers, to produce all these different things, all this architecture all around us, what our home is. In contrast, after all, to things that don't feel like home. Maybe something nearby in the city that feels kind of weird, like it's someone else's area. It belongs to them after all. And if they say you can't gentrify, that means they're claiming territory. You are not welcomed in that area anymore. It's their language of, get out, this is ours now. And the language can be represented in the changing of buildings. Like I'm saying, these buildings of pride, racial pride within other buildings. It's never, of course, our pride, but you can see it in the pride of others. They're clear expressions. So indeed, just like the question of the Taj Mahal, or more relevant maybe to us quite immediately, the question of Notre Dame, the question of modern day St. Patrick's Cathedral, now surrounded as it is with Times Square, the question of Atlanta and Detroit, the question of modern day London, all the horrible buildings going up there. What is to be done? How would a place be when it ceases to be the built environment unique to, of, and for a people, but is instead something else? It's for others, and it's claimed by others. How is it when these people find these areas alien to them? How is it also if no one cares? Honestly, too, a lot of these buildings that'll fall into disrepair, we'll just tear them down. We'll make something new. Who cares? Who honestly cares? I work in architecture. I don't care. Tear it down. Tear another one down. I don't care. I'll tell you, this is why. This is why I've stopped caring, even though I like architecture a whole lot. I've devoted my whole life to it, but I just don't care anymore. This is why. I've come to realize this living building aspect of how a people have a community, and they build, they replicate, they'll cross the Atlantic Ocean, and they'll set up a brand new country, and they build it up. And it bears a lot of similarity with the land that they left behind. Right now I'm talking about Europeans. And then the whole world wanted to come in, and all of a sudden this country didn't feel the same. More and more people feel strange within their environment, that built environment that has turned against them. There is no community center. But this hopelessness right now, this feeling of isolation within your own land, should help us reflect on how our architecture is just a part of our living system. Really, there's something far older than architecture. Think of the oldest we know of, Stonehenge. It's built of stone. As I started, it'll last and last and last, but now it's just a couple stones. We don't know exactly what for. No one's living there. They're not in use. No one knows exactly what to do with them. It's not real anymore. It's just a bunch of stones these days. And that's the oldest. Or how about ancient Egypt? I mean, there's a lot of genetic studies on the pharaoh tombs. We know that Egypt went through a lot of changes. Modern day Egyptians, they're just living among the ruins with, the portions of Egypt that are ruins. Well, those are just ruins. Again, no one believes in Egyptian things. No one perpetuates that culture. it doesn't really exist anymore, and the people who were there, they don't have a continuity. So consider for yourself, how might we have a continuity instead? And if these buildings are part of a living organism, why would we be concerned that they're naturally going to age, degrade, fall down, maybe be torn down, replaced for the interests of others? Indeed, don't be concerned, because there's something so much older than Stonehenge, so much older than ancient Egypt, going back into prehistory. No matter how long you believe that prehistory extends, I will guarantee this is older than all known architecture. And that's the people who make this architecture. The continuity of a person to a person, father to son, mother to daughter, all this continuity, and the community as a whole that always needs to come together, not as individuals, but as a cohesive unit, as a cohesive people. When this comes together, that's when architecture happens. That's when these decisions are made. That's when the built environment reflects the people, the interests of the people, the aspirations, desires, hopes, and dreams of a people. So that's where it's really important. I'm talking about it's far older, and it's something immutable. It's something that you inherit. It's something within you and around you. If we can reassemble, if we can work collectively and communally, if we can understand each other and understand our goals and aspirations again, to recapture our destiny, only then will the resulting built environment be worthwhile again, and not some plastic suburban garbage, not some ever weaker imitations of memories of joy, honestly, that architecture used to be. Weak imitations of what used to be and what we probably remember in some part of our soul that we naturally are drawn to. So consider this age, this inheritance, consider all of this and gather around. As I say, as someone who works in the architecture field, has devoted my life to it, and loves buildings, loves the built environment, loves all of this artwork. I have a very artistic mind. All of this. I would happily watch every statue fall down. Topple them all. Let's watch all of Europe just burn. Go up in smoke. Say goodbye to Notre Dame 10 times over until it's fully flattened and forgotten. Let erosion finally take the last vestiges of ancient Rome. Watch the Pantheon collapse. I would watch all of this destruction. Watch it all burn to the ground. If that meant the salvation of the people, the European people, who are right now facing biological white erasure as a future. That's something we can't come back from. That's something that changes who we are. That will inevitably take it all away anyways. Far older and more precious, extending back countless generations, and only the most suppressed and vague memories and feelings that you have of a people, only these suppressed thoughts there. All else flows from within us and our very being. So, the people, our care for our own people is the most precious thing. All else, the movies you've watched, that little vacation you took, that delightful glass of wine, that tasty platter of cheese, the expertly crafted chocolates. Everything else is insignificant and teeny tiny in comparison to the continuity of our people at any and all costs. We could shed any dead skin that we need to. And if we decide that we really want to continue, then nothing will stop us.
Ich darf nicht länger zagen, bald zwingt sie euren Sinn, nach Ostland sie zu tragen. Sie will, sie muss dorthin. Nach Ostland sie zu tragen. Sie will, sie muss dorthin.